today's date is 9 September 2022, and I am in Alexandria, Virginia at the Women's Memorial, and I am speaking with Rebekah Edmondson. Hi, Rebekah.
Hi there.
Can you just tell me a little bit about yourself? Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
I was born in St. Louis County, Missouri. I have lived in a plethora of states since then, but I currently reside in Charleston, South Carolina.
Okay. What war or conflicts you participate in?
The Afghan War.
Okay. So, global war and terrorism, Operation Enduring Freedom.
Yes.
Whatever people want to call
Freedom
it.
Sentinel, all of that,
Right,
yeah.
right. What
Changed a few times over the
Right,
course
it
of my
has.
participation.
It has. What branch of the service were you in?
I was in the Army.
In the Army. When did you join the Army?
2008.
2008. Okay. Where were you on 2001, September 11, 2001?
I was on a treadmill at a Bally's gym that no longer exists, and saw, on the TV screens what was taking place. I'm sure anybody that lived through that moment can pretty clearly remember exactly what they were doing.
Right. How old were you at the time?
I believe I was definitely at least 18, or close enough to it.
Right.
And I also lived in a not so great part of town, and upon leaving the gym and heading back to my apartment at the time, discovered that in that very short window of time since the attacks had been aired, that neighbors of mine who were Muslim had their place set fire.
And where was this?
In St. Louis County,
Missouri.
Missouri.
Okay. What were your initial impressions when you saw what was going on in New York and here in D.C.?
I think I felt a certain, fear and panic, and just, feelings of shock and not really understanding what all of that really would entail and what would develop as a result of those attacks.
Right. Did the significance of it, did you recognize that at all? I mean, a lot of people have called this our Pearl Harbor. Changed the world, really.
Yeah, I think it happened in a time for me where I wasn't quite connected enough to, my surroundings and the rest of the world to feel that urge to join the military as a direct result. It took me several years before I felt compelled to do that, but many of my friends did, and so I saw, many people it quickly enlist and deploy, and I think through that process of seeing friends of mine depart, it certainly affected me and led me to want to join as well.
Right. Do you have any other members of your family that were military?
Yeah, my father and my sister and my grandfather as well.
Okay. What war did your father and grandfather serve in?
My grandfather served in the Korean War as a Marine, and my father was in the Gulf War.
Okay. How about your sister?
She never had the opportunity to deploy, but she was also in the Air Force like my dad.
Okay. What led you to join the service, and why did you choose the Army?
I had probably less of a call to patriotic duty than most people. I was in my mid-20s at the time, living in Las Vegas, and I was working as a tattoo artist and didn't have a lot of structure or guidance. I was doing typical 20-something-year-old things in Sin City, and didn't really feel like that was a very sustainable course. So after taking a few hard knocks, I thought, I should probably get my stuff together, and the Army seemed like the big enough kick in the pants to help me find that direction and purpose.
Right. And you joined in 08, you said?
In 08.
Do you have any idea what it is you wanted to do, or you just went in and said, tell me what I'm doing?
I knew I wanted to do something, like with my hands. So I first enlisted as with armament, so like repairing small arms and towed weaponry. But then when I got back to my unit and realized I was going to be the glorified armorer that, kind of kept track of everybody's weapons but didn't get to do a whole lot of cool stuff with them, I reclassed and became a welder. And really, really loved that prospect, but that also coincided with what was happening in Afghanistan, and the cultural support team became a thing, and so I quickly shifted from what I was doing with my unit as in a maintenance company to doing more special operations.
Okay. When do you get to Afghanistan?
2012.
Okay. What are your initial impressions?
Ooh, I don't even know how to describe my initial impressions, other than, I guess going over there felt very surreal, and everything that I had imagined and, Googled and heard about and secondhand, it was very cathartic going over there, and it almost felt like a different planet in a lot of ways. You fly in and there's big, blimps in the sky monitoring everything, and, everything's just dry and just so very different from everything I'd been used to living in the United States.
Right. What is your job when you get there? What are you doing?
So I deployed as a cultural support team leader, and essentially that was to serve as like an augmentee for different special operations units, Rangers, SEALs, what have you. Basically, those that needed the support of a female service member on different objectives. And so I had the opportunity to work with a variety of different teams, and my role would be to accompany them on those different missions at night. I was assigned to the direct action side of the house, so we did everything under night vision and in the wee hours of the night, sometimes rappelling out of helicopters and often traversing up and down many kilometers of mountains, and a lot of kinetic action things happening. But when we arrived wherever it was that we were going, it would be my job to sort of organize the group of women and kids that were there within the compounds. I would search them, ensure that they didn't have any explosives or weapons or anything dangerous, and then obviously any type of intelligence that I could gather from them, whether that was physical objects or through verbal conversations.
Okay. Tell us about the very first time that you're out.
Well, it was one of those things that, what could go wrong did. And, I think it was all happening so fast that it was just really hard to kind of stay present and in the moment. I think, once we got off the ramp of the helicopter and started actually, foot movement to the target compound, I felt like every step that I was about to take could have been my last. You're just really amped up, and every single thing, every little movement that I saw, I felt like it was something, and maybe I needed to prepare myself to shoot in that direction. So I was really keyed up, and I was also there as a CST first time and by myself, so I didn't have another partner or colleague, another woman to go out with me. So I was the token woman, and at the time I had a male linguist, so I was the single female on that operation, and we had a very large group of women to handle, and one of those women turned out to have an actual AK-47 hidden under her garments, which isn't exactly small. So I thought that would be the big ordeal that night. But after searching her and realizing she had a rifle underneath her dress, quickly de-escalated that situation. She was really just hiding it. I don't believe she had any intention of using it, but obviously through searching her, found that pretty quickly, and then later found a pistol also wrapped up in a baby's clothing. So just one after the other, it was like kind of textbook. I was there to do a job, and I hit the ground running.
Right. What kind of unit are you with?
That first go around, I was working with Rangers.
Okay. You're with them your whole deployment?
Yes, I was with them for 9 months, but occasionally got plucked to go work with also Navy SEALs.
Okay. Are there anything other than your very first time, which I'm sure you remember vividly? Are there any other incidents that stand out?
There's a few, that still kind of resonate. I don't know really what I would feel compelled to speak on those instances, but I think now that enough time has passed, it's a little bit easier for me to think about and speak about one such incident that took place where a gentleman that was the owner of the compound, the eldest man, came to the doorway when he was called to action to leave. It was there with a unit of Rangers and Afghan Special Forces, and we had secured that area and called the family that was inside to come out. And so, from my perspective, looking through night vision goggles, and I can see everybody's, lasers pointed at the breach or the doorway, and the man came out, kind of with his hands up. But shortly thereafter, his wife followed behind him with a rifle. They were thinking that they needed, to protect themselves. I don't know. I'm sure it was determined who was the responsible party, but one of the gentlemen from the partner unit saw that as a way to escalate and to eliminate a threat, and so he shot, and he actually shot at the man, who was instantly killed. And so then the aftermath of that was my job to then organize his wife, who was standing right next to him as he was killed, and his children, who were not far behind her. And so that was a very difficult, to say the least, it was a very difficult scenario for everybody. I was expected to still stay the course and to do my job and to search and question this family, the woman and her children, who were, very shaken and very upset. And so it was beyond words, beyond difficult to be able to still function in that moment. But I think it was just a point in time where I realized, yes, it was my job to continue searching and to ensure, my safety and the safety of the rest of the strike force. But to sit there and question and get any kind of actionable intelligence from a woman whose husband had just been executed, in front of her by mistake. And those things do happen. And but it sort of made it really challenging and really impossible for me to be effective in that moment. So, I was there with my interpreter, and I kept asking him, what are they saying? I need to understand,
Right.
you know, the situation and context. But he's like, you know, I can't tell you what they're saying. It's not important. And, you know, after urging him to explain the situation, he told me, you know, that they were cursing me, you know, that they were blaming me and saying that I was the one that was responsible. And, you know, that's a really big pill to swallow, you know. And so I remember crying, you know, I remember feeling just that intensity of their pain, and, you know, seeing his wife, and probably his mother was there, and children of his, and just how, you know, that really terrible side of what happens in a war zone where innocent people do die, and as a consequence of those operations. It's you know, I'll never forget, you know, their faces and being in that room with them for that period of time.
What is the mission? Why are you guys out? What are you looking for? What are you trying to accomplish?
Mainly we're looking for those that are planning attacks, that we have been able to ascertain intelligence that sort of identifies them as known enemy combatants, and that have either had a track record of crimes, or they're actively planning attacks against, you know, U.S. forces or people in Afghanistan.
How often are you guys doing that? What's the mission tempo?
It changed over the years. It was definitely the highest in 2012. I was we would have back-to-back operations. We would have 2 platoons of Rangers that would, sometimes they would both end up executing an operation on any given night. So either I would go out on one op, or I would end up coming back and going out on a second. But as well, unfortunately for me, the battle space owner, the commander of the conventional forces of that base, was buddies with the ground force commander that was overseeing the Rangers. And so he essentially loaned me out to the conventional forces. So I was doing sometimes 2 ops at night, and then not sleeping, and then going out on patrols during the day, which for me, you know, all of my training was done, you know, with nightfall in mind. And so I had all this extra gear that I didn't know what to do with. And so I was walking around, you know, without night vision, and in the day, you know, in the daylight, and as a woman being seen, you know, out and about. It was just a very uneasy feeling.
But what is your loadout? What kind of gear are you carrying?
I think the best way to summarize that is, like, what wasn't I carrying? I mean, we had to identify how much we weighed with all of our gear on at any given time to pass up for the manifest for flights. And I think at one point I was sitting at, like, oh gosh, it was like 240 pounds or more. I don't know how accurate that was, but, you know, I had a probably 5-pound helmet, and, you know, a couple of pounds for the night vision, and then a battery pack on the back to try and balance it out. Right. So your head didn't fall forward. I had, you know, a plate carrier. I had a rifle. I had a pistol. I'd also carry a knife just in case those 2 things failed me as well. I carried candy and snacks in my pockets that would weigh me down, and just all sorts of things, because you never know, like, if you were going to end up having to stay overnight, and, you know, out of anxiety for that, you just pack everything in every inch of space that you've got. Right.
So you're clearly at least doubled your weight, if not more.
Close to it. Yeah.
Okay. How about living conditions?
Those were always interesting. In the beginning, it was a lot more meager. My first deployment, I was in Fob Salerno, which was near the KG Pass near Host, and it wasn't a very built up installation. And in fact, I arrived there very shortly after there had been a vehicle explosive attack. So a man had driven a van full of explosives through the gate and exploded the entire half of the installation, and the dining facility and everything was in ruins, but our small compound off to the side was generally undisturbed. So yeah, I was the token female on camp for a good period of time until they flexed a partner over to me, and so that was a lot easier once I had another female that I had a companion. And then shortly after, a couple months in, I was assigned to train Afghan females. So women from the female tactical platoon, when they were very first deploying out to the outstations, I was assigned or given the responsibility to not only go out on those operations myself and fulfill this role, but it was to take them along and essentially show them the ropes and train them as I was also kind of learning that job. So it was a very interesting environment, being, the only woman for a while and then only having a couple of females as allies amongst about maybe 200 rangers and supporting staff.
Right. Are you the only one doing your job there? I mean, are there others that are males doing that, or is it just
no?
This is all female.
Yeah, I mean
you're the only one for a while.
For a couple of months at that outstation, but once I had a teammate, I was at least not doing the double ops in a night. Okay. So if there was 2 ops, I would go out and she would go out, and it was a lot easier.
I got you. What's it like working with a bunch of guys? And not what's it like? That's a bad question. How are they treating you?
Well, that definitely changed over the years. I was very fortunate that I was allowed to continue going back on other rotations. Most women that served as a CST, they were only allowed to do one deployment. Because it was sort of like a loaner program. It wasn't an actual track to
Right.
some career path. So your unit would allow you to go on a 9-month or a 6-month rotation, and then you would return to your unit and go back to life as you knew it. But I was, at the time, I was in the National Guard, and my unit wasn't really doing a whole lot, so they didn't really care if I was out doing whatever, and I continued volunteering to go back. So over that course of time, the atmosphere really changed a lot. In the beginning, in 2012, when I was first there, it was very difficult to integrate. And I think especially given that I was with Rangers, I think they have a certain level of discipline that they are expected to adhere to. And so, grooming standards and all these different things that maybe, Delta Force or Navy SEALs don't have that. So it was very rigid and very strict, and many of the younger enlisted were actually told not to engage with me, not to speak to me unless it was mission essential. I think there was a lot of concern about fraternization and, basically me being seen as some kind of liability, whether that was in a personal manner back at the camp or whether that was, out on a mission. And some of the guys, took me under their wing and treated me like a peer and didn't, they didn't dote on me. They knew I could hold my own and respected me greatly. So it was a mixed bag.
Right. What are your experiences working with the different units? How's it different working from Rangers to Navy SEALs, for instance?
Gosh, it's like it's a lot of it is the same, and that energy and passion and zest for what they do. And I think that was kind of a universal theme. Personality-wise, very alpha and, go-getters. But I think just with the different units, even within Rangers, you have different battalions that have different personalities based on their leadership. And so I think, with the Rangers, they definitely, again, are a lot more strict and, kind of along the straight and narrow, where maybe, a Navy SEAL has a lot more flexibility and not quite as much oversight of what's happening, so they get to bend the rules a lot more.
Right.
Have a little bit more fun.
Right. What about downtime? Do you have any of it? And what are you doing to keep yourself recreated?
Well, I think first and foremost, I spent a lot of time at the gym. That became like my happy place. And so much so that, if we would get notified that there was a mission taking place, that was the first thing that I wanted to do. And I think I realize now that it was more as a means to just dump a lot of adrenaline, because I would get so keyed up about what that night may hold. So it kind of distracted me from being too nervous. And so I would just go lift until I was exhausted and felt almost tired, to where, I'm kind of burnt out now. And it actually kind of translated into, I would just fall asleep on the helicopter. We'd take off, and even if it was a 5-minute flight, I'd be knocked out by the time, I'd wake up when wheels down. So that was definitely what kept me sane while I was over there.
Right. Are you able to keep in touch with anybody over here, family or anybody?
I was able, but honestly, I think the whole rest of the world disappeared while I was over there. And everything that you're doing on a day-to-day basis is so critical that sure, I missed friends and family, and wanted them to know that I was okay, but that wasn't my priority. So I definitely went months at a time without picking up a phone to call back home, and I know that was really difficult for my loved ones to wonder what was going on.
Right. So you're really not paying attention to a lot of what's going on over here. It's just focused on what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any moment in time where you thought to yourself, "What am I doing here?"
Oh God, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know if it's one of those TMI stories, but
right.
I got food poisoning while I was out on a mission, and it was a particular mission where we got stuck. We didn't have airlift to get back that night or the next day, so we were gone for 3 days, and they weren't able to drop us MREs or anything, where everything was happening. It was so kinetic that it was kind of fend for yourself. And so what ended up happening was the Afghan partner unit that was with us, they actually slaughtered the livestock that was there remaining at the training compound that we had cleared. And which seemed like a really joyous occasion at the time, because it was like, oh my God, a hot meal. They were over there making bread and cooking up chicken, and somebody found like an old dusty, glass Coke bottle, and you're like, what the hell? Where did this come from? So we were all sitting around breaking bread, and that felt really great. But the other side of the coin is that not long after that, I developed food poisoning, and I didn't realize it until it was kind of too late. And you don't know what's about to happen and where it's about to happen from. But my linguist that was there directed me to an area of the compound that could conceivably provide me with privacy to evacuate what needed to be evacuated. And I remember in that moment, while biology was doing its thing, that I glanced over and realized that where I was at was actually the room where they were stacking the dead. And so it had all happened so fast, because I was worried that, am I going to throw up? Am I going to... So I totally overlooked that what that pile was. And, I'm standing there having this thing happen to my body and looking over, and it's the visual, it's the smell, it's all of these things taking place in this very intense moment. And it was in that very moment that I was thinking, like, what the hell? Like, what in this moment? Why am I here? Why me? Why this? Why everything? And that very moment was my, what am I doing here?
Right. How many times were you over there?
4.
4. When was the next time?
2014.
Any the same mission?
Very same mission. Op tempo, it definitely slowed down quite a bit.
Okay.
At that time, I was at Bagram Air Base, still going out on missions, but nothing nearly as crazy as the time before.
Right. Anything significant change in Afghanistan that you noticed from? I know it's only 2 years, but is there any big changes, or was it just pretty much the same?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of changes in many of the outstations had closed. So where my first deployment, I had bounced around all over the place. When I was at Bagram, we were really only doing close distance types of things, and I guess it would be called like low-level type of threats. Mm-hmm. But things had definitely winded down by that point. That it wasn't nearly as intense.
Living conditions, everything pretty much the same?
Oh, it was far better.
Better.
Bagram Air Base was, I know there's a couple of nicknames for it that I can't reference now, but they'd had like a boardwalk, and, there's like, you had, a couple different bazaars to choose from, to go shopping and, buying up all sorts of different things, and a couple chow halls to choose from, whereas, at Salerno, it was pretty slim pickings.
How about your third deployment?
My third deployment was just in a training capacity. I was at Camp Scorpion, and the entire time that I was there, I was running basic training for the female tactical platoon. My OIC at the time was at a different installation, so the job that would have originally been assigned to her then became mine, which it turned out to be a really, really rewarding experience, because I really got to understand everything, every step that needed to take place to not only train Afghan women to serve in the same capacity, but to then also think of ways to go out and recruit and find new talent. And so it was very much think outside the box type of gig, and it made me just fall in love with that whole process of being partnered with these women and their male counterparts. I felt way more embedded with the whole cause, and it was great.
Yeah. What were you recruiting and training them to do?
The same thing that I was doing as a CST.
For the Afghan Army?
Yeah, and so these women, which came from both the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police Force, they were already serving in some capacity, but then they came over and they were working with U.S. Special Forces, so they were doing a lot of the exact same things as us, except they were far more effective because they actually spoke the language.
Right.
They actually understood, more of the cultural nuances. They didn't have to go through an interpreter to have a conversation with somebody. So, it kind of, at some point, it kind of flipped, and, we didn't need to be conducting training. They were training themselves, and they were really running and steering the ship, and we were just kind of there as advisors.
I would think that one reason they might be better at it is because they actually had skin in the game, right?
Sure.
You're going to leave eventually.
Exactly.
They're not going to.
Yeah.
They're there to rebuild the
100%.
Yeah. How about your last deployment?
My last deployment was very short. It was really in an administrative role. I had been stateside for about 6 months after my third, and in that time I had ran an assessment and selection process for CSTs. So I was recruiting and training and deploying American women as CSTs, and so there was a good train-up period for them. And once they were ready to deploy, we hopped on rotators and flew out to Afghanistan together. And I took each one of them to the different outstations where they would be deployed to, and kind of did a handover, introduced them to the different teams that they were working with and to the female tactical platoon, and kind of showed them the ropes of what things would look like, and before I came back.
Yeah. What was how did the average everyday, if that's even a way to put it, Afghan, how were they receptive to the Americans being there? Did they know why we were there? Were they supportive?
I think it really would just depend on who you asked. I think that, of course, the Afghan soldiers, they were receptive. We provided, good training, equipment, different things, from our side of the house. But, I think, you talk to the local populace, and I think you'd probably get a much different point of view.
Like maybe they were eager to have you guys leave?
Not maybe. I think that's a definite. I think it was probably a mixed bag. I'm sure that some Afghan citizens would they felt that the U.S. presence provided a certain oversight and ensured that things were taking place and that progress was being made. But it definitely wasn't an across the board feeling.
I'm going to fast forward to last year, and we leave Afghanistan. Are there any thoughts that you have about when you're watching this happen? We're going to leave at some point.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? We're not
and
forever,
I think that's why I inevitably chose to not continue my military career. When my second contract was up, I just decided not to re-enlist. I knew that anybody that served in Afghanistan knew that was the inevitable future, and it was just it was something that I couldn't really accept living with in terms of still being in the service and while all of that was happening. I think I'd already accrued a fair amount of guilt for that known outcome, and feeling like I was a part of that disaster even before it took place. So when it did happen, it was by no means a relief. It was everyone was just pretty thrown at how are we going to fix this gigantic mess? And so it became apparent that the only healthy thing to do is consider what is within our control. How can we as Americans step up and right this very clear wrong? And so most of my life since then has been about what do those types of things look like, and how can I impact that, even though there's a lot that I can't change.
You're writing the history books on this. What would you say our legacy will be, looking back in our time in Afghanistan?
I know it's hard for the layman or the person that never went and served in Afghanistan to really grasp, but so much progress was made. Lord, we had Afghan women rappelling out of helicopters under night vision goggles being shot at, and they took that opportunity and they ran with it. And I think for me, that's the silver lining, that we as Americans, we have so much privilege in our freedoms, and just by proxy of being an American, we have access to so much, and so much that many other countries don't. And so I think it's a testament to what can be accomplished when we take that so-called privilege and we go into a country. I know there's a lot of debate about, what was nation building against, what, but I mean, the silver lining to me is that, American women trained Afghan women to do the same exact job, and those women became even better at that job than us. And all they needed was the opportunity.
Right.
And so I think that could very easily be replicated anywhere if it can be done in Afghanistan, where couldn't it be done?
Right. You're still working with Afghan women?
I am every day.
What are you doing?
I am working to do my best to ensure that their needs are met now that they are living here in the United States. The very women that I worked with in Afghanistan are now living here as refugees. They've had to seek asylum because their service in the military isn't viewed as the same as, for example, we have a special immigrant visa program where Afghan interpreters are given a direct pathway to citizenship for their contribution to our, efforts in that war. Well, the women of the female tactical platoon and their counterparts did that and then some, and they sacrificed their lives and, so much for our benefit. And so it really resonates with me, to talk about, what can we do, what can we continue to do, and using our different privileges and power to support them now that they're here in our country in the same way that they supported us when we were over there.
Right. Looking back on your service, especially your wartime service, how do you think that has affected your life or changed you?
There's no way, of course I'm in the same body as I was before 2008, but the things that I've experienced and seen and discovered are even still like beyond my wildest dreams, some of them in really terrible ways. But even that, I think it's a lot of it's about perspective, and trauma can be in a lot of ways a tool to relate to others and to empathize. Everyone's been through some form of trauma, and just because mine happens to have been in this environment doing these things, it doesn't make it any different or any better than somebody else who never served in the military. And so that's why I try to look at it as a means to connect with other people instead of thinking like, oh, I'm different from them because I did this and they didn't. Well, it's actually more useful for me to think, okay, well, I've been through these challenges and so is everybody else. And so how do you use that as a means to connect to others? I think that's the most useful part.
Let's jump in the time machine and go 100 years in the future. One of the reasons that we do this is to capture stories like yours, so people in 50 or 100 years from now will get to hear it, get to experience it. What message would you like somebody who might be watching this years down the road to know about your service?
That's a really big privilege to even be asked that question. But I think, just off the cuff, I think it's, it's having faith that, what you might imagine to be impossible, pick a topic, that impossible thing is actually completely achievable. But the first step is you have to actually have faith and believe that impossible task is actually not impossible. You have to, approach it as if there is hope, it's worth pursuing, even though if you don't know if it's going to succeed, but you have to try. You have to find the courage and the bravery to step up and do something that is important. And even if there's a lot of risk associated to that it's worth it, because if you don't try, it'll never happen. And so I think my experience as a woman, integrating into combat roles and then training Afghan women to do the same is just, what a huge, rewarding thing to be a part of. So,
what do you think that moving forward, that the role of a woman should be in the United States military? Should it be exactly the same as a man, or is there things that women are better at they should focus their intention on?
I think it depends on the stage that's been set. Certainly, in Afghanistan, there was cultural nuances that had to be considered in order for us to be in any way effective. But I guess just, if you're taking, wartime operations out of the equation, I think the future of women in general in the military, it needs to continue progressing, because my experience, in the past, there's been a lot of scarcity. Women didn't always have a seat at the table to say that they served the same as a man did, or that it equals the same. And so I think there's been a lot of competition amongst our peer group, and that doesn't lift us up. It kind of keeps us stuck at the same spot. So I think women have to understand that the only way that we're going to have that full-blown equality, that we have to work together, and we have to support each other. And I'm seeing a lot of really hopeful things taking place now that leads me to believe that it will get there.
Okay, great. You brought some stuff with you. Is there anything you want to show? Or?
Well, sure. Well, I've got my dusty old kit here. Got it from my first deployment. I don't think it has anything too interesting remaining in any of my pouches, but I'm sure my batteries are probably dead. But yeah, spent a lot of time in this thing, and pretty special. Probably should have started with this one. This is a recruiting poster for the female tactical platoon, and it was used as a means to recruit women into the Afghan Special Forces, and it's just, to me, like such a special, relic of that time. And even though I'm certain that it's no longer on display anywhere in Afghanistan, the simple fact that it exists and can be viewed as a success from that time era is just a really special memento. Probably my favorite. That's probably it.
All right, well, on behalf of the Americans in Wartime Experience, I want to thank you very much for sitting down and talking to us. And I know it's a cliche, but we want to thank you for your service, because it does matter, and it's very much appreciated.
Yeah.
So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.